fearing others, and instead, 2, honoring Christ as holy. We need to take a moment and examine this second idea. We get number 1, don't be afraid. That makes sense for our evangelistic efforts. But what does it mean to honor the Lord as holy? What is Peter referring to when he uses this curious phrase? First of all, the verb he uses harkens back to the Lord's Prayer, where Jesus teaches us to ask for God's name to be hallowed, to be honored as holy. But that doesn't take us back far enough. Writing centuries earlier, Isaiah prophesied of the coming Assyrian invasion, by which Israel would be taken captive and exiled. Then God gave Isaiah this personal word of instruction: "Do not fear what they fear, nor be in dread. But the Lord of hosts, him you shall honor as holy. Let him be your fear, and let him be your dread." Isaiah chapter 8, verses 12 through 13. Isaiah had been commissioned by God to preach a message that would mostly fall on deaf ears. It was a message predicting God's judgment and the people's ruin, as well as the hope of future salvation. But given that commission, Isaiah wasn't to succumb to his hearers' fears, the fear of their opponents, or the fear of rejection. Instead, Isaiah was to honor the Lord as holy. To put it another way, he was to let God be his greatest dread, the fear above all fears. Bringing that idea forward into the letter of 1 Peter, we see the apostle's implicit reasoning by his use of Isaiah's verbiage. We see that being ready with the gospel doesn't involve completely eliminating our dread, but redirecting it. We recognize the greatest hindrance to our evangelism isn't necessarily a stifling fear, but a lack of fear. This revelation helps us understand how fearing God can actually be the remedy to any and all fears, which would otherwise silence our witness. Preaching scared. Yusuf was our family's pastor for about a year, an endearing older gentleman. He possesses the kind of grandfatherly disposition that can warm any child's heart, the sort of glad-hearted greeting that can make any stranger an instant friend. Hidden within his small stature, he also conceals a booming voice fit for the largest audiences in the grandest halls. However, Yusuf only has a small flock, a congregation of about 30, that gathers in a nondescript basement apartment in the midst of a sprawling Central Asian metropolis. His little church was less than a 1-mile walk from our first home overseas. On my introduction to Pastor Yusuf, he welcomed me into his church and showed me a Bible on his desk, complete with an unmistakable bullet hole, a real conversation starter for what he'd endured as a minister of the gospel. Not too long after that first meeting, our family joined his fellowship in what became one of the fondest years of our ministry. During our time there, on a Saturday evening before Easter, Yusuf sat in his small church office preparing and praying for the coming Lord's Day. That's when he heard a commotion outside and a call at the gate. He rose from his study, opened the screeching metal door, and climbed the concrete steps into the night air. There at the front entrance was a group of young men waiting for him. What happened next was a mixture of the shocking and predictable. The young thugs immediately launched into a tirade of hate-filled speech threatening Pastor Yusuf. They said his church had no place in their Muslim community. They accosted him for corrupting the neighborhood. They told him he and his church were no longer welcome. Then, almost without warning, one ruffian kicked him in the chest, knocking Yusuf's small frame backwards. He tumbled down the concrete stair. The assailants fled. The next morning, when we arrived for church, ready to celebrate our Lord's resurrection, we were met with news of the attack. Members spoke in hushed tones, wondering who had done this, and if it was an isolated event. We were concerned about our pastor's condition, as well as the danger for our own gathering on a day of such significance to potential attackers. The joy of Easter was quickly threatened by genuine fear. But by the time our worship began, nerves seemed to have settled a bit. We all took our places, including Pastor Yusuf, sitting in his usual front row seat.